Hi my friend, in this video we're going to be making house music synths, samples, and vocals inspired by Carroll and Hot Since 82's song, Preach. And we're going to find out if we can do this in under 2 hours by using the 80-20 rule of house music melodic elements. What you're listening to right now is a song we'll be working on. And what you're looking at now is the Ableton project file that we'll be working on. In particular, we're going to focus on this melodic group that I had open just right here, and we're going to go in order of how I actually built things out, so that you can follow along layer by layer, so you can kind of follow along in your own processes as you're building out the synths, vocals, samples, and all the melodic elements in your tracks. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video because we will be doing a full recap of the 80-20 rule, so that you can actually apply the main key things here to your own productions. Because all in all, it only took about 2 hours to get all the kind of guitar sounds and the samples put into this track, and if we pull out here, the track has been fully mixed, mastered, arranged, ready to go, whether it be in DJ sets or sent out to labels, and that only took about 5 or 6 hours to complete. So if finishing songs faster, just like this, is something you'd like help with, you can pick up a free copy of template samples and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song like this every single week. Just visit the link that's on screen now or in the description to grab the Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit for free. And if you want to take things to the next level, you can also find a link to this video's project files in the description as well. With that said, let's jump into this. Alright. So when it comes to the synths and the vocals, the samples, the guitars, all the melodic elements for this one, couple things. First is, like normal, I have the reference track in here. I've turned it off, and I have set the S key on my keyboard so I can flick between what I'm working on, or the song, and what I'm working on. So now, this is where I got a little unsure about some things. So I almost didn't make this video because I made a huge right turn on this and ended up making it sound quite different from the reference track. So I felt a little weird about showing this off in a video. On the one hand, like I mentioned quite a bit, as you're building out tracks to a reference like this, you should be indulging and making changes to go in your own direction so you can build out your own meaningful track. But it gets a little weird when you're also making kind of like a how to sound like somebody on YouTube video. So what I think I'm going to do, instead of going through layer by layer, is I'm going to start off with the elements that I was really trying to make sound like the reference track. So if you're coming here trying to find out how they did the guitar or the vocals and stuff like that, you'll get some kind of information out of it. And then from the rest of it, I'm just going to show you how I built things out layer to layer and kind of the process I did to move away from the reference track and start developing a more unique idea, which I think honestly is more valuable, because I think you want to be able to finish songs faster, and how you get there it doesn't matter too much. So with that said, enough of that rambling. Let's kind of go through things as much as I can, because actually let me show you what all my melodic elements sounded like. Compared to the reference. So quite different, I would say. Kind of, it loses that classic house vibe, and then mine sounds a lot more lush and modern, which is different from the reference, right? Let's go ahead, and I'm going to run you through as much as I can here. So first, one of the first things I added, regardless, was this string sound, which I can't even hear right now, to be honest. What's up with that? That's really interesting. Oh! Okay, so cut there for a little bit. So, with that said, the first thing I added was this string sound. If we listen to the reference, you can kind of hear that. A little different sounding. So I do have another layer that I'm going to show you in a minute. But for this, what this is just playing one held note, a sustained one note, and then I'm using this house string little simpler device that I made. So it's just like a house string sample, and I've set it up so that it's doing this sustain mode here. So the initial note plays, and then it kind of moves back and forth, so it sounds like it can go forever. So So that's a little trick you can do here. This is with the sampler, not with the simpler. If you grab the project files, you can just take this house string. It's pretty useful to throw into everything. With that said, other than that, main thing is a little bit of process and getting rid of some of the lows, making sure it's not competing with the bass or anything, and then rolling off a bit of the highs so that it kind of blends in a little bit more with the rest of the mix. And then I do have it set up with an automation, so throughout the track as an arrangement trick, it kind of comes out a bit more at certain parts. Other than that, we're running into the one knob sidechain that I have here, which is just an Ableton shaper, going to quarter notes and just ducking a gain. This way it's going to the rate of a kick drum, so you don't have to use a compressor or do all that kind of like annoying stuff. Unless you like doing it, you can do it, but like setting the threshold and the ratio and all this stuff, it's just the one knob, dial it in, move on. That's the idea, finishing tracks fast. And then an Ableton saturation device just mapped to this one knob here again, so that it's kind of filling out the sound a little bit, adding a little bit of grit and texture. The next element that I want to show you that I added, this is not in order. I kind of came back and realized that this house string is not fully sounding like the sustained note there. And so what I added was this right here. So let's listen to the reference. So still a little different, I would say. The other one sounds almost like more like a pad. I went for something a little bit different because I know that like the main element is like a guitar. So I actually recorded myself playing this little guitar bit, just like kind of pedaling on one note, and then threw one of these Ableton amps on it, this heavy kind of distortion one here, then threw it into this RC20 on the VHS preset, kind of dialed up the wobble a bunch so that it's kind of wiggling around. It sounds a little bit more interesting, I would say. And then I tossed the Valhalla Supermassive, which I believe is free actually, and so this is kind of making it sound a little bit more spaced out. So trying to make the guitar sound a little bit more like a pad. So let's jump back to that. The sustained note there. And then just moving some of the lows, so it's making room for the kick and the bass, and same thing, kind of getting rid of a little of the top end to kind of mix it in. Then one knob sidechain, so it's pumping, making room for the kick, some saturation to bring it out a little bit more and kind of fill out the sound a bit. And then a little bit of this shifter, very light. That's without it. And this is with it. Very light. It's just adding I believe this would be a fifth. 7 semitones, I believe, is a fifth above the root note that it's playing, and it's very lightly dialed in to add a little bit of like kind of fullness. Again, trying to make the guitar sound like a bit like a pad. So let's move on to one of the next elements that I did add was this pad, actual pad here. So let's have a look and listen. And if we listen to the reference, there's nothing quite like that in this tune, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that and show you something that's a little bit more like it. This was my take on the guitar bit, so let's have a look and listen to this. Let's listen to the reference. And then mine. So I would say considerably worse. That's kind of why when I was kind of working on this, you can see I kind of buried that in. So it's more like a subtle layer that's adding to the track in a small way. And basically I just figured out the guitar part like with an actual guitar, recorded it in, and then through the same processing as before. So that amp, that RC20, so it's wiggling, and then I added some little funkiness with the EQ8. I brought up one of like the mid bands a little bit at 1.2 kHz to try to get that kind of like radio sound that you can almost kind of hear. Or maybe not radio, but just like vintage is what I was trying to get. Threw a little bit of a compressor on here. Just trying to even out the sound a bit. It was very wild and like unruly. I wanted a bit more of a consistent signal. And then threw it into this effect rack, just using this minor movement preset, and then adjusting it a bit so it's wider and going at a slower rhythm. This is just moving it from the left and right a little bit, adding some like movement and interest, some sidechain so it's pumping, making room for the kick, some drive so it's filling out the sound a bit, making it pop a bit more, and a little bit of this one knob width plugin, which is from Polyverse Wider. It's free. I've just mapped the core knobs to an Ableton rack so I can just one knob it and just kind of make things more stereo, push things to the left and right. I would say if you were going for like a 1-for-1 carbon copy, this doesn't sound quite like the original, and that's why I started to kind of take liberties with adding a lot more effects and then burying it in underneath everything for some additional elements. I would say at this point, there's only a few more elements that I did add, but this is kind of where I started taking things in a new direction. So one of the things that I added was this pad that I showed you a bit earlier. Solo it for a second. It's a cool pad sound. Basically what I was hearing at this point is in the tune, you can hear that kind of like pad sustained string sound that's almost panned to the right. In mine, when I did that, it felt like there was something lacking on the left side, so I wanted to fill out the sound a little bit, so I added this pad. It's just holding the same sustained note, or a different, slightly different sustained note. This is an F instead of an E flat, with the string sound is playing. And then, what is the sound? Some freaking preset, surrounded by Noctua. I don't know if I changed this too much, probably not. Then just some EQ, moving some of the lows, getting some of the highs to kind of push it into the mix again. A little bit of one knob sidechain. Here I have a device that's just the one knob sidechain. A little bit of saturation, bring out the sound a little bit. That's it. The idea here was to try to fill out the sound a little bit more, and that's how this, I think, track also ends up sounding a bit more modern, because it sounds a little bit more filled out. Then what I also added in were these different string sounds. Just solo it for a second. So there's obviously nothing like this in the reference track. I was trying to almost like change the element being the focus of a guitar and changing it to strings in my version. So it's a little bit of a riff that I made up there by, I think I was listening to some older disco track and kind of used that as the inspiration to come up with the notes. In terms of the notes, this is what's being played. Held note with a few little flourishes. Main thing that I usually do in these instances is find the key of the song, so I set it to F major up at the top. That way this is all in scale mode, and then you're basically just picking notes that are in scale and doing a little bit of like following your gut. And the more that you do this, the more that you can build up like your own musician's intuition. You don't need to learn a lot of music theory, but knowing some of it is important, which I can make another video on at some point, maybe what like the minimum amount of music theory that's needed. That might be useful. Yeah, that's a look at that one. Then we're just running into the standard channel strip that I have on every single one of my tracks, both MIDI and audio, so that way this always loads up and I can make quick moves and mix as I go. So moving some of the lows, this is just naturally moving at 200 Hertz, so every track that I make is automatically making this move, so I don't have to throw an EQ on every single track. This way it's, whichever track I add, it's always making sure that it's not interfering with the kick and the bass, and I can make quick adjustments on the fly because it's already right there. This is the transient shaper, which I'm not using too much in this, so I'll skip that. And then the one knob sidechain, so it's pumping. Then the next thing I added was this sound right here. Listen on its own. And this is meant to be kind of combined actually with this and this. Which is kind of that sustain note here. So just adding a bunch of different elements to kind of get a similar effect and make it a bit more unique by kind of going at it from a slightly different approach. This is playing the same notes as that initial piano sound. What I've just done is this. I just duplicated it over by like highlighting everything, pressing Option, and then just bringing it down to the octave below. So it's kind of creating almost like a chord and like making this a bit more filled out. In terms of the processing, I pan this one to the right, so that way it's kind of balancing out against the main kind of string sound that I just showed you. That's a lot more like present. Running into this string sound from Ableton, a little bit of space echo to kind of fill it out, make it a bit pattier, kind of moving some of the lows, shoving up some of the highs to kind of push it in, and a little bit of one knob sidechain to make it pumping. Then one of the things I added next was this. I'm gonna solo it for you. It's a pretty subtle element. If I bring it up a lot in the mix. So where this came from is when I was trying to figure out how to turn this like track into like something that I can make as a remix. I found this track called Safra Duo. I don't know how, but and then I used AI to split it out, and I was like gonna try to make it a mix for that, or a remix for this tune, but then it didn't really pan out, but I ended up just using it as like a cool little layer that adds a little bit of like a funky vibe. So just chopped up the parts that I liked, and then removing some of the lows, throwing on this A1 trigger gate, which is free and awesome, and adds that kind of stutter house kind of vibe, and then filter it out a bunch, added some envelope, and then an LFO at a 16th rate, so it kind of makes that like warbly, filtered sound. If you can hear it, listen for the warbliness. Which is a little trick I love to do. And it's a one-up sidechain, so it's pumping, and a little bit of width, so it's pushing to the left and right. Then I think the last thing that we're going to go over here is the vocals. So let's take a look and listen to what I ended up with here. So I ended up with Tame Impala's song, I Don't Really Mind, from their like first record, which is so fucking good. It took a while to find a good acapella. I'm not 100% sure if I dig this too much, but it's what I ended up with, and it's absolutely nothing like the actual like preach tune. For the preach tune, what you'd want to do is find like some like classic house kind of like rant, or like kind of some kind of like preacher kind of ranting sound. Maybe make it sound a little bit like radio, so it's from the vintage era. I really didn't want to do that. I'm not gonna lie. I want to prioritize actually creating a finished track that I can use. Apologies for that, but it's also what I'd recommend that any of you would do too. Actually finished tracks that you can use in DJ sets and sending to labels and stuff like that, as opposed to just recreating tracks. And if you are recreating tracks, like, it can be useful to follow it to a T, but like if inspiration strikes, man, you gotta fucking let the track tell you what to do and build it out where it needs to be, and say fuck education for a little bit. But with that said, basically I have two layers here. Let's listen to the first layer. So what I'm doing is pitching it down 8 semitones. I was just trying to figure out a way to get it to fit, and this sounded cool but wrong, so I added this one in, and then I added in the correct version, in my opinion. And this is pitched down just 1 semitone. And the trick I'd use for that, especially if you're not too music theory inclined, is like, just go over to Google and type in the name of the song and key in BPM, and that'll help you figure out what the BPM is, so that you can use like the warp markers to adjust things properly, and also to adjust the pitch. And then just like look up a piano roll keynote. So if it's like your song is in like C and you need to get up to D, then you would go up 2 semitones by following the piano roller. I might be wrong, so double check that, but that's the idea that you can use to make things fit in together, particularly when you're using samples and trying to get like a remix or bootleg going. Anyways, we'll quickly go over the processing because there's not much here. Just removing some of the low end, a little bit of sidechain so it's pumping. I think I did the same thing for both of these, so yeah, nothing too crazy. And then on the group layer for this, I have this Alpine Box preset from my buddy John Alpine, which is just slowly warbling the pitch, so it's like slowly morphing over time. So you're kind of like getting lower and then higher. Really cool way to kind of make vocals sound a little bit more unique and interesting. And then a little of this phaser flanger, which is adding kind of that like psychedelic Tame Impala vibe. And then I just have an LFO that's slowly adjusting the dry wet, so it's adding in that effect and taking it away, adding some movement throughout the track. Yeah, I think that's a good look at the synths and vocals and all that kind of stuff here. Definitely a little bit different, not a full one-to-one remake or anything, but I think a lot of like cool little nuggets that you can use when following a process like this and ultimately trying to finish your own tracks and create something original and unique that you can actually bring out into the world. That said, we'll do an 80-20 recap so you can kind of get a quick review of everything and apply it to your own music. Before we jump into that, I want to mention that this video is sponsored by our good friends over at Rocket Powered Sound. They hooked up particularly the kick drum that you're listening to, and it's from their Ultimate Sample Pack, which is a sample pack filled with 1,000 iconic and usable sounds. If you want to pick this up, you can get it for 30% off using the code that's on screen now, Ultimate Best Friends, and visiting the link that's on screen now or the link that's in the description. Thank you again to Rocket Powered Sound for hooking up the channel and the community like this. And with that said, let's jump into this. Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here. And if you've been paying attention, then you've probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to creating melodic elements like synths and vocals for your music. The goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, or effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule when building out your melodic elements is to use a reference track, we are making sure that we're effortlessly hitting 80% of a very professional benchmark. In particular, we use that reference track to focus on playing in the right key, following a similar rhythm, and selecting the right sounds. This just keeps things fast and focused. The second key is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume of our sounds compared to the reference track, as well as using a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we add to our songs. The third and final key is that you don't want to reinvent the wheel each and every time, so you should start a practice of repurposing your old project files by adding old project files, racks, and groups to your collections area in Ableton. By creating a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time, you'll be able to get a higher quality result faster. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later and check out this playlist of videos where I remake other melodic elements like synths and vocals from other songs in the Beatport top charts. Or if you want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, check out this video right here.